Kongversation.
I was gonna be a man in a gorilla body with a frozen skull for Halloween!
Right, okay, here we go. Hello and welcome to the Kongversation, and it's a very special episode as we are sitting down with DM Cumbo. He has done artwork for several titles in the Ratchet and Clank series, Sunset Overdrive, and numerous other games, and is the founder of Dream Prism Press, where he's putting his talents into the creation of a brand new authorized Yooka-Laylee graphic novel, Yooka-Laylee and the Kracklestone, now on Kickstarter. DM, can we call you David, Dave, D? What do you prefer?
Dave is usually the easiest.
Dave, okay. So welcome to the show. Thank you so much for being here.
Thanks for having me. This is great.
Yeah. So it's been a big week for you.
Yeah, it's been a surprising week in a lot of ways.
Yeah. So as I mentioned in the preamble, there you've launched a brand new Kickstarter just a few days ago for Yooka-Laylee and the Kracklestone, and as of recording here at 6 p.m. on Saturday, let's see, you are you're nearing 30,000. You are out of a 40,000 goal minus stretches. So you are
just at 70%.
Yeah, that's pretty terrific. But yeah, it's. I'm sure you're probably exhausted right now.
Well, you know what? It's funny. You know how they say you get a second wind if you stay up all night. And I've had about, I'd say, a collective about 20 hours of sleep in the past 7 days. So you reach the point where you get the second wind, and then you're exhausted, and then you get this kind of weird like alternate universe wind that comes like a few days later when you really need to sleep, and you just start getting super loopy. And so thankfully the loopiness is helping me just continually refresh windows and go to different tabs and do what I have to do. So it's been more fun than anything.
Yeah, hopefully this will all resolve and you can get some sleep before you get to the seeing spiders crawl over your body winds, which is when you know you've been up way too long.
I think I might have seen a few of those just earlier today, actually. So I think we're already too late for that.
Well, we obviously have a lot we wanted to discuss about this project, a little bit about your background. Cameron, take it away.
Oh, yes. I guess I didn't really get an introduction there. I didn't want to interrupt you. You were on a roll. Yeah, hi, I'm also here.
Hi, Cameron.
Hi, Cameron.
Hi, Dave. Pleasure to have you with us.
Thanks a lot. It's really nice to be here.
So, just go ahead and get this interview started with the kind of like an obligatory interview question. How'd this all come about?
Well, it's there's a really boring answer to that, and then there's a much more fun answer. So I'll start with the boring answer. The boring answer is an email was sent, and that's it. And then let's see. The more exciting answer is that I had a mutual friend in Mr. Grant Kirkhope, who a while back moved to the States. He came and was working with a company called Big Huge Games, which is just a hilarious name. I love that name. And they were making this game called Kingdoms of Amalur. I assume you guys have probably heard the music for that Grant did, which is a change of pace from Rare. And when he finished that project, I believe it was the only game that studio did. So Grant was looking to move to Los Angeles, which is where I was living at the time. I was working with Insomniac Games, which is in Burbank, California. And so I had talked to Grant about just his plans. And, I got in touch with him, and we were just kind of chatting back and forth. And I approached him pretty much as any fan of Rare's history would have, with the usual... oh, Grant, yeah, I grew up with the games and your music, it's so amazing. And I listen to it all the time while I'm working. And I guess in sort of a weird, ironic twist, I think I was in the process of developing a pitch for another game adaptation graphic novel while I was listening to Grant's music. And I think I told him as much. And so he had made a move to Los Angeles eventually, and we stayed in touch. And I had hit up a few times to just ask him about the possibility of, as I put it, getting the Rare band back together. And I said this so hopelessly, like there's just no way. I said it almost as a joke that, it's been, I think I told him, I'm like, it's been about like 14 years since I played banjo. Like, I really want to play another one of these games, and nobody else seems to know how to do it. So could you just do it? And he kept joking with me about that he was going to get the band back together, and that there's like 6 people or something that he had been talking to. And I thought, yeah, like that'll happen. Because when I was at Insomniac, I would talk all the time with people who are just colleagues at different studios. I have friends at Blizzard and Riot Games now, and just all over those Los Angeles studios. And the funny thing is, they all kind of you kind of have this thing where at the end of the day, you always talk about your dream projects, things that you like to do, but they never come to fruition. And so I never really liked hearing that. So when I was talking to Grant, I said, all right, you better be serious about this. And it turns out he was, and that Playtonic became a thing. And I know that wasn't just, obviously, it wasn't, Gavin Price and the team were involved with that, getting that all set up. So when they had set up the studio, I almost, believe it or not, I approached them almost immediately about doing this book. So that might be surprising to people, is that while this project is just announced now, I actually have been thinking about doing a graphic novel with them before Yooka-Laylee was even revealed. And my intent was to just do some sort of a partnership project with them, because I just dug the idea so much. And it just made sense for it to be a book, because that's what I was doing at the time. And so I just thought, okay, can I imagine a Banjo-Kazooie book? And so that's kind of how I thought about the project, is what if I were to make a Banjo-Kazooie book, what would that be like? And so I pitched it to Grant, he pitched it to the team, and Gavin responded to me, and both acknowledged that my favorite flavor of wine gum is correct, that clotted cream is incredibly good, and thirdly, that they're interested in the book, but not yet, because they weren't far enough along with the project to really have enough substance for me to work with. And then, following that, I think about a year after that actually is when our talks became more formal, and I got in with Team 17 and was talking with Debbie Bestwick, who is the head of Team 17. And it was really between Gavin and Debbie that project became really feasible. Debbie really pushed for it. So I have a lot to thank her for. And Gavin is so interested in crazy ideas all the time, it seems, that he was excited about the idea. It was just kind of cool to have a book based on the game, and I think the team thought that was fun. So that's pretty much how it got started.
Oh, yeah. It's pretty fascinating. I did not expect the road from getting from there to here would have predated the game itself. That's really interesting.
By quite a bit, in fact, yeah. But before it even existed, there was the idea of a book for a hypothetical game.
Well, in your Kickstarter video, and obviously just now you alluded to it, you talked about your love for the classic Rare games of the past. So this is the Kongversation, so we need to talk just a little bit about that before we move on. What's your favorite?
My favorite, it's that's a tough question, but I'm going to have to go back to Donkey Kong Country 2.
Oh, good answer.
That one's still my love passion.
Yeah.
I don't even know. It's one of those, I'm sure, I'm preaching to a choir, of course, but when I talk to people about Donkey Kong Country 2, I feel like I'm talking to a beloved, long-lost relative. It's talking about, rather. And it's just that game. I can tell you that, while I'm working on the book, I mean, there's so much just constant drawing and drawing and drawing. And so I'll be doing that for, upwards of 14 hours a day. And I have to find something to listen to so I don't lose my mind. And I put on Dave Wise's soundtracks so many times throughout the course of developing this book that it's kind of crazy. But just experiencing Donkey Kong Country 2 back when it first came out was incredible. It's impossible. It's kind of impossible to explain to a lot of younger gamers today just what it was like back in my day. When we had Donkey Kong Country 2, because it was it was so revolutionary, and it was the gap between what you had and what you got with that game, even in comparison to the first Donkey Kong Country, was stunning. And it was overwhelming. So it's a huge inspiration to me. Of course, besides that, I would say, of course, Banjo-Kazooie being a top choice, and Jet Force Gemini is another top favorite of mine.
Oh, yeah. That's seldom mentioned, but it has a dedicated fan base among our listeners. But yeah, it's interesting that you said Donkey Kong Country 2, because I was fully expecting Banjo, given the nature of this project. So I think that's earned you some credibility points that you actually gravitated more towards DKC. I mean, it's a toss up because they're both in probably my top 4 games of all time, and it just depends what I'm in the mood for. But yeah, DKC 2, that's definitely earns you initiation into the cult, as it were.
Oh, sweet. Yeah, I've always been a lurker, so it's really nice to actually be here. But with Donkey, if I can just address that really quickly, because I'm a huge fan of Banjo. I mean, it's a given. And the thing that I love about Banjo so much that Donkey Kong did not really have, and it wasn't for lack of anything, it was more just the nature of the design, is I was crazy about the kind of get lost exploratory nature of Banjo. And the fact that you can really, I mean, one of the things I love so much about Yooka, and this is something I explain to people on the team all the time, and it was frustrating actually when the game came out and there was a lot of criticism over things like the fact that the worlds are kind of vast and there's not a map, and I thought, oh, that's kind of what I've been waiting for 15 years. Is the chance that I can just kind of jump into a world where I don't know where to go. I don't know what to do, but I see something pretty in the distance and I want to know what that thing is. And that pretty thing in the distance is going to have some wonderful, crazy, wacky, funny, and beautiful surprise. That's really what I love about Banjo. And so that was a huge portion of my appreciation for Yooka. But then at the same time, you'd be surprised by how much Donkey Kong influence there is in this book. And I would say that despite it being a Yooka book, and despite Yooka being a reference more toward Banjo than Donkey Kong, I would say that this book probably has a bit more of a Donkey Kong Country vibe than a Banjo vibe, I would say.
I guess that makes sense. There's no real hard lines drawn between these series. They're all kind of intertwined with one another. You see a little bit of areas where they bleed into each other.
Mm-hmm.
So we talked a little bit about the game itself. So now, when you started the project and working on it along the way, what was it like working with Playtonic, and how did they sort of react along the way to seeing their property filtered through your lens? Like, did they have any interesting notes for you, or just what was that process like? Working with, what I can say is my favorite working experience thus far professionally has been with Playtonic, primarily because I'm very independent, and they gave me a lot of space. And part of Playtonic feels very much like Rare did in the 90s, where they kind of just kept quiet. And I think to some degree that harmed them a little bit with the Kickstarter structure, because Playtonic's theory is kind of old school. They basically interest a lot of people, or they get funding of some kind, and then they buckle down and they get to work, and then they put something out. But the new way, and this is something that I also am not really all that accustomed to, it's something I'm getting more so accustomed to, but it's sort of the constant sharing on social media and being very vocal with people who are following the project. And, the Rare way, for me at least in the past, was magical, because you didn't really know what they were doing until it was done. And then you suddenly saw a game on the shelf. And then you brought that game home, and it was like a magical world opening up that you didn't know anything about. Anyway, I'm sort of blathering on here about that because I'm trying to explain philosophically how they operate is very, very old school Rare. As I understand it was, and that's from talking to Grant and hearing more about their philosophy. So they believe very much in letting people do what they do well. And so when I approached them with the book, it was funny because of how offhanded it was. I mean,
one of the things that I want to be very careful about what I'm allowed to say, because I am on a typical non-disclosure agreement with them, the same as the employees. So what I'll elaborate on just a little bit is that Playtonic was very, very concerned about worrying backers in any way about our relationship, and that was something that started on kind of early, that I had to work through a little bit, and that, which I think is great for Kickstarter backers of the game. Like one of the first things that they told me, and this, I just figured they didn't want to pay me, but what they told me basically was, look, we got Kickstarter money to make a game, and that's what we're going to use it for, and we're not going to be investing in all kinds of things like this, and because the game, as I don't know if you watched my live stream with Grant, but basically we talked a little bit about budgeting. And despite the success of the Kickstarter, it's actually an incredibly low budget for what they did. It's about, I would put it right about maybe around 1/15th of a typical budget to do that type of game. And they accomplished it with 6 people. And you typically you would have 60 people doing that on a typical project like that. So I don't just consider what they did. Incredible is not enough, even remotely enough of a word of what they accomplished. And the fact that they were that ethically dedicated to using the Kickstarter money correctly, and they are so down and focused on getting everything done. It's just, unfortunately, it's a combination of, they like to buckle down, get focused on things, and that means that, and especially until recently, they haven't had a community outreach manager, and at the same time, they also take their time, because that's how you get really good stuff. I mean, the book itself is, we're going to be 2.5 years when it's all done. It's like its own little game production, and so that's that working with them was you can probably spell out kind of how it went with that, where my relationship with them was to essentially, I basically had to come up with everything. The funniest thing that about the process of writing the story and pitching it to them, I love telling people this, was that when I got the go-ahead to do the book, I was waiting for like some sort of a conversation to happen where it was going to be like, okay, Dave, here's our ideas for the story. And it wasn't like that. Like I remember having a call with them, and they're like, all right, what do you have? And I'm like, well, I don't know, because I've only seen the E3 trailer. and then they're like, all right, well, just let us know when you have something. And I'm like, well, wait. And so I actually wrote the story. I wrote the first draft of this book, and this is going to sound horrible, but I wrote it based on the E3 2016 trailer for the game. I didn't know of any other characters that were in it. I knew of like Yooka-Laylee, Nimbo. I knew I knew that Dr. Puz was in it, right? And so I sort of made the characters that were featured in that E3 trailer the central characters in the story, because they're the only ones I knew existed. And this speaks to Playtonic's kind of rare legacy of history, of secrecy rather, is they would not share these details with me initially, because they have that sort of that ethical obligation to the Kickstarter backers, and they're like, well, we got to be really careful about what we share. And I remember telling them, like, well, guys, I got to write a story here. So what I did actually is I wrote a story for Banjo-Kazooie, and then I gradually adapted it for Yooka-Laylee. And started to kind of replace characters, and what I found is that it was a bit of work, obviously, to modify the experience to fit Yooka-Laylee, but it was the games do have quite a bit, I guess, design-wise in common. So it wasn't the worst thing in the world. I just thought, okay, there's a decent connection here, and I can write something for Banjo. If I'm stuck on something with Yooka, I'll make up a temporary character. I'll make up a temporary, like just a placeholder or something, and then I'll substitute it when the time comes.
So does that mean if we read this, we can try to play the parlor game of figuring out which Banjo characters or which, or does that no longer apply?
No, it wasn't so much that I used Banjo characters. Like, it didn't actually put Banjo characters in. It was more that I worked off the vibe of Banjo. One of the first things that we had a discussion about, and this is kind of embarrassing, but it's just the way it went. As I said, if I was a teenager, like a teenage Rare fan, like I was, one of the things I love so much about playing Rare games is that it was culturally British. And it just had a very English sensibility to it. I mean, there was something about those games. It was like, I didn't know too much about just English culture in general. I mean, I'd seen Mr. Bean and, Monty Python and all the stuff that my brother had collected. But
okay, so just to clarify for our younger listeners, those who weren't around in the 1990s, those were literally the only British cultural imports we had to the U.S. in the
Doctor
mid-90s.
Who was a long time coming.
Yeah, there was no BBC America. There was none of this. We had there was Oasis and the Spice Girls, and then there was Mr. Bean and the Monty Python movies. Not even Flying Circus. So it was a cultural wasteland for the Anglophile, and then there was Rare, and so that was actually our gateway to that kind of cultural mindset. And so,
and it was fascinating to be honest, because English culture, I think when I was a young kid and just knew what I knew about England, it's this country over in Europe, and it's kind of similar to ours, and you don't really know what the differences are. There's little kind of subtle differences between the cultures, and that was fascinating to see them come out in the games. And so it was almost I do want to say it was kind of like it was a magical alien experience to enjoy these games that came from a different culture. How did I even get on this tangent? Why am I talking about? Why am I talking about how England? Oh, it's because when I approached them, as I said, do you think fans are going to like an American coming in and working on this property? I actually had that conversation with them, and it really was not such a big deal to them. But at the same time, I think they had said that they'd work with me to how do they put it, Britishify it. So that it would have more of a sort of a similar sensibility, which basically came down to them making fun of some of my word usages and that sort of thing.
Right. Yeah. No, it's as somebody who wrote emails to Rare's website every week back in the mid to late 90s. I got my fair share of that as well.
I feel like that kind of follows what I remember playing those games back in the day when, I'm a kid. I don't understand how game development or localization works. And it would just be something I never thought about until that occasional moment where, Banjo used this expression that I never hear. Wonder what that's about.
Yeah. Core. What the hell does core mean?
Core. That's exactly what I was thinking.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. Wait, what is that? I don't even know what that is. What is that?
I still don't know. But
yeah, these are the things you learn. Yeah. Or it's another one that I heard. I thought it was just a goofy thing in Banjo is when they say "wah-hey."
Yeah. Wah-hey.
What is the wah-hey thing?
I don't know, but it is part of my lexicon. Not something I'll actually say in polite society, but when I'm by myself, when I'm just muttering nonsense to myself, I will find myself going back to the Banjo-Kazooie exclamation. So
well, I had a fun time talking over with them various colloquial terms, and I didn't know what was profanity and what wasn't. I'm trying to be careful with this, and so sometimes they would make suggestions, and we would, it was very lightweight what they contributed in terms of actual, mostly it came down to editing and formatting, and basically the relationship was like this. It was they eventually gave me access to be able to see the world and the characters and that sort of thing, and then I could be like, okay, all right. Great. So, originally, I didn't understand Nimbo and Nimble's relationship, right? Because this was I knew Nimble existed, but I knew it was like a female cloud character who is together with Nimbo, and I thought they were husband and wife, and they're actually uncle and niece, and so that was a hilarious rewrite.
Well, Banjo's sister Tootie originally started development as his girlfriend Piccolo, so there's precedent for that kind of thing.
It kind of sounds like you were doing the thing we all did back in the day when there was no information about these games except like a JPEG watermark screenshot on IGN, and you'd concoct these sort of explanations to yourself of, oh, why is that there? I'll find out in 7 months, but here's what I'm going to tell myself it is.
Well, I'm just an old school fan, just like anybody else. I think the thing that differentiates me a little bit is just that I do come from, professional game development, and the fact that I just, I just got it done, and they agreed to do it. That's pretty much it. But in terms of my approach to it, it's kind of funny. I like to think that there's nothing. It's surprising how not special the process actually is, because they require you to just do so much alone. And then I struggle really, really hard to make sure that it fits the right vibe. And fortunately, I have, since the age of, I think, 5, an experience with rare games. I mean, I think my first game was RC Pro-Am, maybe. Oh, yeah. Wizards and Warriors, I would say, is probably those two. I loved Wizards and Warriors as a kid. I couldn't play it very well. It was a hard game. But, since I was a little kid. And the funny part is I didn't even make the connection that these are rare games until I think the N64 days, probably around GoldenEye's time. And then it started to occur to me that I'm like, oh, this is rare, right? The Donkey Kong Country Company. Oh, they made Wizards and Warriors, and RC Pro-Am and all these games I loved as a kid. So it was like a quick jolt together when I realized what a fan I was of a company I didn't even know existed.
Yeah, I think Rare was a lot of people's gateway into like learning a bit about game development and actually paying attention to who made what. And it was like, oh wait, Rare. And then you realize they have this extensive back catalog on the NES and even further back than that. So it's just, yeah, that was like, I think everybody's first like entryway into the larger world of actually understanding how these things were made. Nintendo doesn't just make all of these things and put them out. They're actually made by teams of people.
It was certainly that way for me. I mean, the epiphany I had, I think, was, all of these games with this gold and blue badge on the front are very, very pretty.
Yeah, that was pretty similar. That icon, man, that really sold it. If you saw a game in the store, once you understood that Rareware logo and you saw that logo on a box in the store, it was an instant purchase.
I think it took me another 5 years to figure out, oh, that's an R.
Yeah. It didn't matter. It was shiny and beautiful and blue and gold, and it represented happiness and a very, very fun night when you get home.
Yeah. I think people figured out the R before they figured out the pun of Diddy's Kong Quest, which I think there's still people out there who don't realize that's a pun.
I'm really, really proud that I got that right away, even as a kid. I'm like, oh, I get it. It's his conquest, and it's a conquest.
So we broached the story a little bit, but I want to go a little bit deeper into it because this fascinates me because I have no artistic skill. Cameron's the artist between the two of us, but I like words. I like story. I like plot and lore. And Yooka-Laylee and the Kracklestone, it takes place after the events of the game, and you've concocted a brand new grand tome that it takes place in. And the Kracklestone itself is a powerful MacGuffin that, Capital B and Yooka-Laylee are both racing to get. But it seems like you're also throwing in some character development for Yooka, and that there's actually a bit of a crisis of confidence that he goes throughout the course of the story, which I find really interesting, considering that's not something we would ever see in just a 3D platformer like Yooka-Laylee was. Mm-hmm. Maybe something like Conquer would feature that, but that's not really the norm. Mm-hmm. How did you conceive that element of the story? Like when you sat down to, what was it? Just I have the freedom. I have 120 some pages to do this, and I can actually go a little bit deeper into the psyche of these characters.
Okay, so I want to give you two answers. I don't want to forget both of them. So I'm going to tell you. Let me answer about the. First I'm just going to address what you just asked about the nature of Yooka's development, and then I'll branch into the other topic. Basically, when I started, I have to just kind of go back a little bit here. When I was thinking about doing game adaptations, I thought, what makes a book that's based on a game or around like a game universe interesting. And what I thought at first, I just addressed this question actually today with someone who was asking this, is, why would you pick a game like Yooka-Laylee, which really doesn't have a lot of story development? I thought, well, when I was initially thinking about games to adapt, I thought about very story-centric games. Like, I think at the time I was playing 9 Hours, 9 Persons, 9 Doors on the Nintendo DS. And I thought, like, this is an example of a game with a strong story. And, one of my favorites from the past was Silent Hill 2. That's still one of my favorites. And so I think about these sort of games that have very strong stories, and they do things with stories in ways that no other medium can, especially Silent Hill and games like it. And so I started to try and think about projects that were story-centric that I could approach. And then I realized that if I were to adapt it into a book, I ran the challenge of trying to essentially compete with a game that already had a great story. It was very story-centric. And I thought, wait a minute, I'm going the wrong direction. And instead, what I should do is I should work with these properties where they have amazing characters, like just, really promising characters, but not a lot of story development. Because then what I can do is I can offer a way to kind of fill in the gaps in a way that the game does not. A game, when I worked at Insomniac, I worked on 5 Ratchet games. And, what I would see all the time is all of these great assets would be prepared that would sometimes not be used. A lot of stuff would get made, and, an artist would pitch something and it would end up getting cut from the game. And I thought, there's all these great assets that get made for games and then never get used. And I thought, there's so much story potential for all this stuff. It's almost like the art was made for a story that they forgot to write first. And that's the nature of game development, because it's really about gameplay. It's not about storytelling, unless it's a story-based game. And then I thought, actually, the worst type of book that I could do would be one that ties in with a story-based game. And instead, I sort of have kind of a fill-in-the-gaps relationship with like a game that is not about storytelling. And I thought, well, Yooka-Laylee is not about storytelling. Yooka-Laylee has a fun little story. It does have a fun story, and it has great character engagement. So it's actually it's just an absolute perfect candidate for a book, because they have strong characters. They have great interactions between them. The relationships between them are already so potent. But there's not really a huge, detailed narrative arc that has much to do with a character struggle. That's just not really dealt with in the game. Yuka's presented kind of like Mario or Banjo. He's a hero and he saves the day. And so when I thought about what makes an but in a book, you can't just have a character. Well, you can, but it'd be kind of lame. You can't just have a character just be a hero and then make it to the end with no challenge or struggle. You need a character to really fall. And so I thought, okay, I'm going to tell this story about Yuka and Laylee. I could make them both protagonists. I could make one protagonist or the other. And as I was writing, Laylee's very sort of snarky cynicism served as a great counterpoint, because it provided an interesting challenge for Yuka. And this is starting to sound very dramatic, but you get through the drama and then you get back to the humor, right? You got to have like a foundation of meaning, and then you add the humor afterwards. And because Laylee provided such a good counterpoint where she challenges Yuka a lot, even in the game, she kind of tests him. And I thought that was really interesting to kind of play on. So this is basically the hook, I guess, of it, is that Yuka is a hero. It's not the typical thing where it's questioning the goodness of a hero. It's more what happens when a hero who is such a good character that they want to protect everybody. Like Yuka feels like, I have to go do it, and it plays into the game, right? Because what do you do all the time in the game? You meet up with characters and they say, I have this problem. And then Yuka's like, don't worry, I'll fix the problem, right? And what happens when Yuka can't? And it's because the world is too challenging. And so this is something I really hope will appeal to you and your Donkey Kong country love, because this is where it really gets to the heart, the core of Donkey Kong Country. You remember with Donkey Kong Country games, of course, you would unlock secret worlds. Right. When you beat the game, and you had to undergo a lot of challenge to be able to do that. And they thought, now I get to enjoy my reward. And what happened when you got into the secret world is you found oh my God, these are really hard levels. And so that is the logic of the Secret Tome. And it's a hyper challenge world, basically put in a book, where Yooka is challenged. It's very much a parallel to the player experience of getting to a secret world and where they're completely overwhelmed. And Yooka just gets destroyed. And he really has a hard time. And it's because the world, and this also plays into game design philosophy. Forgive me if I'm rambling on here, but it really has a sort of a game design centric philosophy where you have when you get to the secret world, one of the ways you make it challenging is you take player expectations and you flip them around. So if the whole game was like, okay, what do you do in this particular game? You can fly. Okay, this game's all about flight, right? So the game progressively gives you greater and greater flight-based challenges, right? But then in the secret world, you take away the power of flight, and you force the player to now think about the same types of challenges without that ability. So Yooka now is in a world where his power set is not helpful, and he's kind of like a weakling in the world. So that's the fun of the story, is that he basically tries to be a hero and tries to do what he does well, and he ends up getting more and more lost in this world. And that's why it had to be this large, expansive world, but I didn't want it to be something that has only one theme. So I made it this kind of mishmash world. So it has all the expanse that you would expect from a game, but it's all in one tome. And so it's a jerk of a tome. It's really hard. So that's kind of, does that answer your question?
Yes, and it's actually, I find it fascinating because, being a Rare fan since Donkey Kong Country, a hardcore Rare fan since Donkey Kong Country, and in my youth, I would spend so much time thinking about this world and kind of reverse engineering it, whether it be Donkey Kong or Banjo, and just trying to think about what made the world tick, and like outside of the game experience. And the thing I loved about Rare and now Playtonic is that they always provide, they always go above and beyond and provide just enough depth and detail into this world that you can actually like build on it in your head. It's a plausible, implausible, but plausible in the context of what they're presenting world that like, characters just go about their mundane lives. And it's fantastical, sure, but it's kind of rooted in day-to-day drudgery too. And so that the fact that like you're going about this in a similar way, like expanding on just the core gameplay experience, but actually being able to flesh it out, I'm kind of jealous, honestly, because it's a dream come true.
Well, if it makes you feel any better, it took an awful long time to get here.
It's something I've like kind of fallen in love with already, and just the preview pages you've shown is that Yooka and Laylee get to banter a lot more with each other just by themselves, which is something that like in the normal course of a gameplay loop, you really don't get to do too much with the protagonists outside of a cutscene where the player's not doing anything. It's sort of filling in those blanks that normally when playing a game the player would fill in themselves, like Yooka and Laylee, say, jumping up a really tall mountain. If you were to watch somebody play that in game form, it's just you're watching the characters silently bound up a mountain. What we've seen so far is sort of Yooka in the preview pages, Yooka and Laylee facing a challenge like that and sort of evaluating to themselves what's going on as it happens, and that's really thrilling to see.
Right. Well, that's a good counterpoint to the game, right? So a lot of times with the book, see, I still actually kind of think like a game designer. And part of it is just thinking about this, what makes this particular project interesting. It's not just a story about a chameleon and a bat. How about that? It's what it is. It's what makes it most interesting. Well, I can't throw out the fact that it's a game. I can't throw out the experience people have with the game and just make it. That's the kind of thing that happens with junky cash-in projects, where people know about the characters and they get like a sheet that shows the characters, like, okay, this guy's a chameleon, so what can he do? I wanted to throw something in that would be meaningful for players, so that they get that sense of parallel to their own experience. So when you read the book, it doesn't just read like an adventure story. It reads like playing the game feels. There's really no term for it. It's just, I try to make it so that when you read it, it gives you the same sensation that I remember getting when I play games like Donkey Kong Country and Banjo and Yooka for the first time. And Jet Force Gemini. There's a lot of Jet Force Gemini influence in there as well.
So yeah, you mentioned before, like how you settled on some of the returning characters, obviously the clouds, and very surprising answer that I was not expecting. But you also introduce new characters to the Yooka-Laylee universe in this book. How important was it for those new characters that you introduced, that you conceived, to fit the tone established by the game's creative team, either? And I don't know when they were in development, if you had actually already played the game by the time you put them to paper, as it were. But how, like, reverse engineering Yooka-Laylee and making new characters. If you can go into a little bit of the process behind that, because I find that fascinating.
Yeah, that was really challenging for one reason and not so challenging for another. So it was really challenging, one, because I actually started designing characters. So here's what I did. I didn't design any sort of protagonist or side characters before I got to play the game, because there was enough already to work with that I was having trouble fitting characters in, because Yooka-Laylee has a ton of characters. And so I thought, well, there's actually so much to work with here. Why am I bothering to bring new characters in unless necessary? And so that kind of was my philosophy. I'm like, I'll make new characters where needed, and I'll leave it at that. I do want to introduce new stuff, but I think there's two ways that there are two types of new characters, right? There's actually new characters. Like, I made like a lot of new sort of monster types. Like I have the Mush Muncher, for example. Like that's a fun character that they find in Fungicide Forest, which is, other than Windy Peak Pass, my favorite name in the book. They came about because I needed a character for that, and there was no similar world that I could reference in the game. And the game also, because they were stretched so thin and trying to develop, right, they made so many characters, and yet, I didn't want to only make like sort of corplet characters and that sort of thing. So I do have those. I have like the flower corplet characters, and I have what I call the Crackle Core, the Crackle Corp, and that's something that comes up later in the book. So I created where needed, and then I used. But what the other type of new character was, a character that was in the game, but was not explored very much in very much depth, right? And so a great example of that is Dr. Puz. So Dr. Puz has a very specific role in the game, but she's a really fascinating character to me. She's a challenging character to me because she's so bizarre for a lot of reasons. And so I thought, this is a fun character that I can work with. And so what I did was I gave her not so much a new personality, but I had to flesh her out in a lot more than I think the game had to. And so there's two ways to be new, right? It's literally new, and then it's figuratively new in the sense that I've evolved the character. And it might not. That's not to say that I tried to improve the character. It's that I tried to make it work for a book. And that's not necessarily going to be possible by working with the character exactly as it exists in the game.
Yeah, well, you've already established something that I think we had no idea about, in that she does have human DNA in her. In the little write-up on the Kickstarter page, you've established that she is a four-armed mad scientist human octopus hybrid, which
I'm gonna throw this out there because I that's human. So there was a you remember the movie Willow? You ever see the movie Willow?
Oh yeah.
So there's a scene in which who is it now? There's like a sort of a wizard lady in that who's older, right? And she ends up getting transformed into an animal at a certain point. And I believe the humans in that movie were called daikinis. Like they didn't refer to them as humans, right? From what I remember. But I remember when I was a kid, I remember the character, when she's turned into this animal, she says, "Turn me back into my human form." And I remember thinking, aha, I caught you. She's supposed to say, "Turn me back into my daikini form." And it bugged me, and I realized they made a mistake. And so I'm sitting here like an idiot saying, I actually don't really know if she's human or not. But I had very little time to finish writing those, and so before the Kickstarter launch. So don't hold that as canon. I don't know for sure if she's human or not.
Yeah, I don't believe you can go back and edit those either.
Well, I think that I might be able to edit, but I'll slate it. That'll be my 11th task for the tomorrow.
So we've kind of already gone through the challenges of getting the feel of a video game across in a static medium like a comic, and I feel like you've done that really well. And again, what we've seen so far, there's a lot of interesting choices. Like you've included a world map as part of the book. You've gone with panel layouts that are really kinetic. And I was wondering, visually, how did the fact that you were specifically constructing a narrative based on a video game property guide how you were using that to tell the story? And you've also mentioned, I did tune into your live stream, that one of your influences was old Nintendo Power comics. I think specifically Link to the Past was mentioned. And what other works and artists have influenced the direction you decided to take with this?
Okay, well, there's a couple of different questions there. I let me try and kind of take.
It's my turn to ramble.
No. They're all.
Sorry about that.
No, they're all really good questions, and but they all deserve their own response. So basically, in terms of the art style, I mean, I'm an artist before anything else. That's what I got started doing, and so I do tend to think about things from a visual perspective first. And one of the ideas behind the way that I handle page layouts, and this doesn't have necessarily as much to do with Yooka-Laylee specifically, just as the way that I handle my pages, is that I like to treat pages in the book as cohesive works of art. So that one of the things that bothers me a lot about comics, and this is definitely a contentious point because people will argue back and forth about this, is that I don't like when comics are they're laid out in a manner that just takes you from one panel to the next. It does help with story flow. You kind of lose yourself in the process of reading. But one of the things I really like to do is when you turn the page, I want you to get kind of a powerful impact looking at the whole page at once, and then begin to observe the smaller points. And I do like to use different panel shapes and, as you said, kinetic angles and things like that to try and bring emphasis to certain movements and expressions. And of course, is the sizing of the panels. But the main reason that there's so much kinetic placement of panels is because I'm trying to make a good visual harmony between panels on the page. I come from layout and storyboarding and that sort of thing. And so comics were really challenging for me because in storyboarding, you have to, I thought comics were going to be so much easier, but they were like 10 times harder. Because in a 16:9 ratio screen, like I used to do previews for Ratchet, you'd say, okay, I'm going to use the rule of thirds and that sort of thing. I'm going to put the character here. I'm going to put this thing in the background. I'm going to make sure it's framed nicely. And I have one shot that I have to worry about. But in a comic, you have interesting framing within interesting framing. And you can make a panel look great, but then it won't look good with the panel next to it. And you can make two panels look great, but then they'll look terrible with the page as a whole. And so it's a really hard back and forth to try and make a visually pleasing assembly. And I treat it like a game puzzle. It's a puzzle to try and work things into the right shape and form. And that's something I'll show more as the project moves forward. I'm looking forward to doing that sort of making of type of thing. If the project is successful, I want to be able to do like weekly updates like this and talk about how I'm working on the pages and bringing attention to where it needs to go. So a lot of that's kind of my first point on the visual. The second thing that I think that you asked was how specifically the game influenced the visual style of the pages. If I had that right, is that basically what you were saying? Or
just your influences in general.
Well, one thing that I brought this up in the live stream, but I realized I didn't make this very clear, is when I was talking about color gradients. One of the things that really blew me away about the N64 Rare games was how beautiful they made the games, despite the power they were working with on that system. They were always kind of a step ahead of what everybody else was doing. Nintendo had Mario 64, which was clean and pretty in its own way, but Banjo was just blew it out of the water with its amount of detail and all the texture work that went into it, and decent texture work too that didn't get all that blurry too. It was really impressive. And one of the ways that they were able to do this is if they wanted to show a wall, just say like a cave wall that you would walk through, instead of just making it a repeating gray texture, they would paint a gradient of color so that on one side of the wall that's in the distance would be blue, and the part that's closer to you would be green, and it would fade from green to blue sort of over the texture itself. And what that did was, first of all, it made the games look incredibly colorful, because you didn't just get one color for a thing. Like, it wasn't just a brown floor. It was a myriad colors in the floor. And so you get this explosion of color in Rare games, especially because you have control over what you're looking at in a game. So it's kind of hard for them to even restrict the colors depending on how you position the camera and where you're standing. And so that sort of color blast was a huge influence in Yooka's color choices. It's one of the reasons that I have such confetti color all over the place, is I'm trying to emulate that crazy jumble of colors that you get with Rare games. If something's blue, it's not just blue, it's green and purple also. Does that make sense?
Perfect sense. And I think you've captured that really well. This book glows with color.
Well, that's one of the main goals, is try and make it as colorful as... Hopefully it'll print well.
Oh, yeah. Yooka as a very bright green character.
He is.
From my experience, bit of a challenge with printing sometimes. Well,
one thing that I'm working on, and I don't know if I can do this, but I might be able to with the book, and I didn't want to make the announcements if it's not possible. We'll lean toward it's not possible. But
we
one
can
that I would
bleep the
like...
next 10 minutes if you need us to.
What's that?
We can bleep the next 10 minutes if you need us to.
Okay. Well, I was just going to say that it's feasibly possible to print books in more than 4 colors. Where you have typically books are printed on a 4-color press. It's cyan, magenta, yellow, and black. And they sort of get all the colors they can. But when you're on the screen, you can basically have an impossible range of colors that can never print on paper. So I had looked into printing with an 8-color press. And so you're actually able to get a much more vivid use of colors. Now, I don't think that's going to be possible, but it is something that I'm looking into. So we might be able to get an incredibly, just unusually vivid book as well.
All this talk about capturing the look of Rare's N64 games, and now I'm thinking if you had done a graphic novel that was a spiritual successor to most N64 titles, you could have literally just had it be a fog machine blasting it in your face.
Yes. Well, it would have been a lot faster to make the book, I'll tell you that.
Absolutely. Kind of wrapping up here, but I want to touch a little bit upon this because I find this fascinating with this project. So the notion of expanded universes for a video game or supplementary material like books or TV, that's actually taken seriously and made by fans of the source material in cooperation with the game studio. That's kind of a new phenomenon, at least here in the West. So this is DK Vine, so obviously the Donkey Kong Country cartoon looms large in our psyche, and that obviously has its fans, and it introduced many young viewers to the concept of Donkey Kong Country, but it also represents an older style of media, like the vintage Super Mario Brothers Super Show or the Zelda cartoon or even the Bob Hoskins movie. it doesn't really do their source material justice in a way that diehard fans would expect. And like I said, it's always been a bit different in Japan, where you might have an anime or something that mostly gets it right. And, that cross-media accuracy is kind of expected. But I really feel like we've turned a page here in the West. And, a decade ago, talking about Rare, there's the Viva Pinata cartoon, which was made in participation with the studio. Same thing with their current Sea of Thieves comics and novels. And now Playtonic has your graphic novel. And, it's gotten to the point where we actually are considering the expanded materials to be part of the canon of the game. So would you like to speak to any of that? Is this due to gamers themselves like you growing up and entering the business? Or is it just media companies becoming more savvy in the age of the internet and actually having to communicate with fans on a day-to-day basis?
I can't speak to the latter, but I would say the former for sure. But there's actually one more very simple, just kind of, I don't know, just silly point that I would make is that, when I was a kid and I had my Nintendo, right, and I had like my 6 games that I would play over and over again. One of them being Mario 2 and Mario Brothers 2 on the NES. When you play these games as a young kid, first of all, kids have vivid imaginations, and the games are very limited in terms of what they visually describe. And so you kind of have to use your imagination to expand the world a little bit. And so when I still remember going to this discount store, and I think I was like 9 years old or something. I went with my mom, and I was in the store, and they had a big basket it was literally like a basket. It wasn't even a box of like comics that were just these rejected comics. And I'm looking through them, and I found a huge collection of the Nintendo Comic System Valiant books.
Oh yeah.
And I picked them up like they were diamonds. I'm like, oh my God, because there's no internet, there's no, I was the youngest of my brothers. Like there's not a lot of sharing with other people out there, who are interested in the type of stuff you're into. And then it's like, I played these games and I love Mario so much. And I would like open the instruction manual and like stare at the art of Mario and be like, I want to see this guy do more things. I would get things like, I remember we used to get those Scholastic catalogs when I was a kid in school, to order books and things. And one of them one time had like a Mario print software where you could like print out images from Mario. And I remember ordering that, and like anything that was anything that was attached to expanding the Nintendo universe was like manna from heaven for me as a kid. And I would read those Nintendo Comic System books over and over and over again. And, no matter how off the vibe they were, like it was exciting. And when the Mario movie came out, that actually I was hideously disappointed with even as a kid from like an expansion point of view, because it was so off the mark in terms of it was literally, the Mario movie was like if you tried as hard as you could to make the most opposite thing of Mario. That's what it was. It was just this drudgery, dark, disturbing kind of futuristic Blade Runner-y kind of. And well, anyway, that was it. But the point is that it did expand the universe. Thus, it was exciting to fans like me. As I grew up, my fandom for games never stopped. But the cool sort of adaptations, or at least the mere presence of adaptations, sort of cut down. And the time when I realized I was actually most disappointed with the expansion was around the year 2000, I'd say like 2000 to about 2010, when it's not that there was actually more merchandising than ever, but the merchandise for me was kind of lame. Like it was always like it was some sort of a trinket or something, or like a plush doll or something like that. It was always just sort of like, okay, here's a game that's popular. Let's have 10 things that are kind of cool. We'll have like, plush and a figure and that sort of thing. And that's fine. But it didn't like open the world. And so then when we started getting all these incredible indie games, like games like Shantae, that were really building up like a really, I guess I'll call it kind of like a rabid fan base. You had these great games, and I thought, why is there not like somebody doing really good books based on this that are not cash-in books, that are really, really good and have the same like motivation and energy as the game. And then I realized, well, that's probably not done because they generally don't make that much money. It costs an awful lot of money for, big comic makers to make them. And I thought, well, what about like a small comic maker, like, I don't know, me, like I could do it. I could just make the book, right? It would take me like 8 months. It took me 2.5 years, so 2 years. But the point is, I see it as a whole in the industry because they're so like, I don't know about you, but I feel like every week I hear about an amazing new game. I feel like I can't keep up with the industry. There's so much amazing stuff coming out today.
Just this month alone, really. I
don't have time for anything. Like I'm playing a game, and I have now with what I'm trying to do professionally because I want to adapt a lot of properties. This is I have this thing I'm calling the Game Legends series. I want to do I want to adapt like the greatest games and put them into books, and that's part of what this Kickstarter is really for, is to test the waters a little bit. I keep trying to play these games to find out for what are good candidates. And I do have, there's actually, believe it or not, there's actually 3 or 4 studios that I've already talked to about adaptations that are kind of waiting on this to see how it goes, which I can't reveal, unfortunately, who they are, but we're waiting. Hopefully this campaign will do well. I just see it as a whole in the industry. I think somebody who cares needs to come in and see these games expanded in a way that is not going to do poorly by the fans. There's going to be something that really carries the right vibe, is not going to Mario movie it, is going to do something that really fits, as you say. So sorry, again, I'm rambling, but I hope I've kind of conveyed the point a little bit there.
Well, and you actually kind of clarified something in my mind that I hadn't considered, because the move towards digital media and the reduction of packaging, game and manuals are not as prolific as they once were, and that was such an important part of it in my youth, was taking the game manual, reading it religiously like it was a sacred text, taking it with me on car trips, just studying every inch of it, and we've kind of gotten away from it. I mean, manuals, you might have a digital manual, but it's not the same, and you don't have all that art in there, and so this kind of fills that hole.
Well, let me address one more point on that too, because I totally forgot to mention. I always forget to bring this up, but one of the initial reasons that I really wanted to go forward and do physical books, it ties into that specifically. Is I tried to convey this to people, and this was, mind you, about 5 or 6 years ago. I said, well, I want to do game adaptations, and I want to do books, and not just books, but maybe you remember a company called Working Designs. Remember Working Designs? Well, they were a JRPG localization company that used to release these insane packaging for their games. So they would have they did the Lunar games on the PlayStation, the original PlayStation. They did Alundra. They had there was, let's see, what else they do. Well, they just, what they would do is when they put a game out, they would do a crazy package for it. They would have this embossing and foil stamping. And a lot of my own inspiration for this book came from that, was having something that's very physical that attaches to the digital experience of a game. That's something that we're, as you say, we've been lacking. I think people sort of attach to the manuals because that's what we remember. But a big what we're actually experiencing there, in my opinion, is a need for a physical representation of the thing that we love digitally. Because a lot of young people today grow up, believe it or not, this is insane to me, but they grew up digital right from birth. That everything they own, basically, that they care about is kind of just on the phone. And as a result of that, you don't get the benefit of really feeling like you own anything. And I've been vindicated a little bit by the calls for all these Switch physical copies. You hear people talk about this all the time. People want physical cartridges. They really, really want them. And I'm thinking, yes, that's because you have this digital game and you want some sort of a tangible trophy for it, something that you can hold on to. And I thought one of the coolest things about these books is this is not just a book. This is not like a perfect bound, glued, piece of junk that's going to crack open. It's not soft bound. This is a serious, collector's edition, heirloom quality book that I'm going to have. That's why I'm only selling the hardcover, right? Right from the lowest tier that I have on there is going to be a really high-end hand-sewn book. Because when fans see their games that they love adapted into a book, I want it to be something that can take the place on the shelf that the game doesn't anymore, if that makes any sense.
Oh, absolutely. And actually, I think I started to break out in hives when you started talking about people being digital from birth and never owning anything like that they can have in their hand besides their phone. It just, that's a dystopian hellscape for me.
Well, that's part of the logic here is that I want to make something physical. That's why I said it was such a big component. I said, honestly, it's almost as much as 50% of the importance for people is to be able to, it's not just about the thing that's inside the book, which I'm trying to make be excellent, but I also want an excellent physical thing, and I need it to be physical. That's what it just has to be.
I guess this kind of dovetails nicely into this question we wanted to ask, because you spoke about wanting to do this with other video game properties and kind of expand the number of these stories that are out there. So, I mean, you're a little bit familiar with DK Vine. What video game property covered under our sort of Donkey Kong universe umbrella do you think you would personally most like to make into a comic?
Well,
dream, like...
like no red tape, no restrictions, whatever you want.
Well, honestly, I probably would. That's a... I want to say, honestly, I want to say Jet Force Gemini. But the thing is, I would say Jet Force Gemini or Donkey Kong Country, probably, and specifically the country characters, because that's a world that I really want to explore. But the reason that I say Jet Force Gemini is I've got like a very clear vision in my head of what I want that to look like and have this really fun, cartoony, playful, sort of futuristic, spacey vibe. And Jet Force Gemini did that. So what I was thinking is I keep merging in my head Diddy Kong Racing Space World with Jet Force Gemini to kind of harmonize into this wonderful, fun, very colorful, spacey adventure. And that's one of the reasons when I played Yooka-Laylee and I got to Galleon Galaxy, I was like, oh my God. I think I played it. I think I worked really late that night and I went and played the game for a bit. I think I was up like all night just playing through Galleon Galaxy. And I had this stupid grin on my face the whole time because it was so much what I remember loving about like that space world and Diddy Kong Racing and that Jet Force Gemini vibe. It's just, there's something about it in that world. And so I did, I can't say anything about how our conversations went, but I'll just tell you that I am constantly bugging the team about letting me work with Shell to do a Jet Force Gemini sort of inspired book. So I would say if I had like a dream thing, it would be Jet Force Gemini. Coincidentally, there happens to be a character that suits that very, very well, within the Yooka world. And so I would say if I had a dream project, it would be something with her.
Well, yeah, I was going to bring up Shell because Shell has been the source of so many like fan theories since Yooka-Laylee came out. Like, oh, is Playtonic, is she like in there to be like a spin-off, or are they going to do something with her? Are they going to do a Jet Force inspired game next? So it's interesting to me that would be the project you would want to take on next. Is there anything else you'd like to say to the audience before we wrap up here?
Well, I would say, the usual expected thoughts, which is, please do support the campaign. I've been working a long time on the book. I mean, the big thing that I wanted to do, I've been able to learn from other Kickstarter campaigns. Not the least of which, honestly, is the campaign for the game, which is, the team jumped into that, and they certainly, if you were to ask them about their experience with that, I'm sure they would tell you that along the process you learn a lot of things. So they've been able to share that with me, and so one of the things that was very, very important to me was to make sure that there's not that many unknowns with this, which is why I waited this long to do the campaign. There were actually some ideal times we probably could have done it, maybe a little closer to the launch of the game. But the reason I waited this long is because I wanted to get to the point that I know just how long it's going to take me. My initial predictions were 8 months. So, I didn't want to like go and do a Kickstarter and then have it take 2.5 years and have some really upset backers. So I've done everything I can to try and make this we'll say an ethically run process. And, we're estimating that the books are going to ship out in June, July, depending on where you are in the world. So please back the campaign, because this is the start of something that I think will be really incredible. And I really need some help. So it would be great to be able to expand and get some help. So I'm not doing everything, because literally it's just me at my computer doing everything right now. But if this campaign does well, then I can do things like go to the bank and say, hey, can I have some money so I can hire somebody to help me? And we can make like more than one book every 2 years. It could be like as many as 4 every year, and we still wouldn't be able to keep up with all the incredible properties. But personally, I would want to personally work on stuff with Playtonic like that. I have a really good relationship with them, and I know I don't know, but I feel as though they have some very, very exciting stuff coming down the road. I know they're working on a lot right now, and I can't wait to see more about it. Like I said, I watched the E3 trailer and wrote a story based on that, so you can imagine how little they actually share with me. So I really don't know, but I know that what they do next is going to be amazing, and I'm really I'm gonna want to jump right in and do another project with them, probably another Yooka book, and hopefully something based on something else they come up with in the future.
And we'll make sure we hold their feet to the fire to make sure that they actually reference the events of the book in the game.
No promises in that regard, but we yeah, we'll see what happens.
Just leave it to us. We'll
make it work.
You bug him about that. Yes, we got some of my monsters in.
We got a goldfish in Dr. Puzz's bowl after years of harassment. So
that was you. Oh, so you're the reason I've drawn that goldfish so many times. Thanks a lot. Thank you so much. I keep forgetting that goldfish. I'll like finish the pose and then I'm like, what am I forgetting? Why does she look like she's not complete? Oh, it's missing the goldfish.
Yeah, sorry about that. So anyway, people have till is it November 15th?
November 16th is our last day. But
November 16th.
Yeah, go in and back. I'll do my own plug. It's just back early because waiting until the 16th it means that we might be a little riskier.
Absolutely.
You get full confidence, and it's better for everybody.
And plus, if you back now, you'll get some great back rewards, and there's still the all the physical goodies available in the $75 and up tier. You've got the coin, the Crackle coin, character art print pack, signed book plate, and more. So, and of course, you'll get the book as well. So why wouldn't you?
That particular edition is in limited quantity, so definitely act early.
Right.
Yes.
But just to amend to that, also, I've been talking with backers just today about adding more tiers because some people have been requesting some more items, and so I'm not totally set on it yet, but I'm the things that I'm considering are to have a higher tier that will include items from the Grand Tome Pack in the most perfect name ever, the expanded Grand Tome Pack, that will have additionally a collectible metal pin, an enamel pin with kind of raised line art on it, a sticker pack, a fabric bookmark that's in the book, bound in, as well. What is the last item I have on there? Oh, and a cloth map of the world, and I'm going to do a new map illustration for that. So that's something that might be in that next tier, and then I have one that will also include original drawings because I have gotten requests for that as well. So look forward to some expanded tiers.
Oh, all right. Well, that is Yooka-Laylee and the Kracklestone. Kracklestone with a K, all one word. On Kickstarter. Head over there right now to back the project. And Dave, thanks so much for being here, and best of luck to you.
Well, thank you both. This has been so much fun.
Way hey!
Way!
Way! Way!
This has been a File 2 production.
Que rico.